We are back again. If you're someone who looks into any part of history on this planet, you'll notice that there's a big trend with events, and that would be that a lot of the main events in history are historically criminal activity. A lot of things that we as people like to look at and like to dissect are all big crimes and people going against the system that was put towards them, either doing something nefarious, dangerous, or like a mixture of the both in some type of like chaos. But even in these cases, I find that there's some people that stand above the rest, and it's normally for like little eccentricities that you find um, when it comes to these cases. But there's one today that I think is one of the most eccentric criminals I have ever seen. And this person goes by the name of the Roofman. Now, if you know who this person is, um, they're pretty notorious for their string of robberies. They were a known robber. I won't go too far into it. We'll get into the nitty gritty of this stuff. I took a deep dive, and we're going to go over the entire life of the Roofman and what led them to their Roofman crimes. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Jeffrey Allen Manchester was born in 1971 in Sacramento, California. Now, we don't really know much about his early life. To be honest, I couldn't even find his parents' names. The most important thing that we really know is that he would go to high school, and he would come out of high school enlisting into the U.S. Army. He would end up being in the 82nd Airborne Division, and this is where he would learn a lot of his trademark skills, like rappelling, drilling holes, weapons handling, how to order and deal with people, etc. All sorts of different things that would help him in his later crime sprees. However, it wasn't always business for Jeffrey. He would get married in 1991 at the age of 20, but would later divorce in 1999. But even before he got divorced, Manchester would start his crimes, and what he would do is he would rob a series of McDonald's. And honestly, I feel like that makes an odd amount of sense, right? I feel like if you've robbed one McDonald's, you've probably robbed them all. I think that their buildings are probably pretty similar. So, I mean, if you're going to rob a spot, I mean, it might as well be the same spot, right? You'll just get better and more efficient at it in some twisted way. Now, he was known for being very meticulous about his planning and things having to be done perfectly, like in every sequence of events. Um, Manchester's primary way of entering these McDonald's would be drilling a hole through the ceiling and rappelling into the bathroom. And he wouldn't just walk in and rob the place from there, right? Like even though it was like still like the late '90s, they had security cameras at this point, from what I've seen, and it would just be kind of difficult to learn to pry and to get all the money out of the registers. So what he would do is that he would wait, sitting in these bathrooms until the morning crew came in, and before that they would open, he would rob them. So I would imagine he'd get there very early. He'd either like drill, saw, or like hack his way from the roof into the bathroom, probably during the middle of the night, and then he would just camp out there and wait until the morning crew showed up. He would rob them at gunpoint, and what he would do is he would have them take the money out and then put them in the freezer and lock them in the freezer. And this is where we get some interesting testimony, because during these robberies, firsthand accounts of this said that he was very polite. He was not like angry. There was no emotion. He was very monotone. And when he spoke, it was an order, and then he would do something. And some people even said that he was nice enough to allow people to grab their coats. That way they wouldn't be cold in the freezer when he'd lock them in there. Which, I mean, I guess it comes back to that old adage of like professionals have standards. Like imagine you have a guy holding like some type of handgun or rifle at you, and he's like, "Oh, don't forget your coat. You want to be warm. You want to be toasty when you go in the when you go in the freezer," and then slam the door shut on you. Now, Manchester would be remotely successful in these crimes, right? He would rob a lot of McDonald's, and he even got so bold that on May 20th, 2000, he would rob two of them in the same day, like back to back. Now, these two robberies happened in North Carolina, and he robbed them with a 22. That was his weapon of choice, I suppose. It was a 22 rifle. Now, what Manchester didn't know was that at the second location as he was robbing it, one of the employees hit something called a silent alarm, which as entails, unlike the regular alarm that would like blare some type of siren and make a big fuss, it would silently alert the police to get to their location and to help them. So when police arrived on scene, either Manchester found out or he was just that efficient at robbing McDonald's that he was not at the scene. Um, so the cops were searching for him. They couldn't really find him. And so what this kind of was is that the McDonald's had a forest between it and a nearby church, and that church had a parking lot. So there was an officer like outside by the church patrolling, they're looking for him, and they would see him come out of the woods, probably mask on, going towards his car. And so once the officer saw him, he just turned around and ran back into the woods, which is some type of Looney Tunes scene. In my mind, I picture him like running out, stopping, pirouetting on one foot, and just going right back into the woods at full dead sprint. It's just, what do you do at that point? He definitely was still determined, obviously, but I don't know if I would have been the same. He would then be arrested, found by the police, and he would later be interrogated for this crime and obviously a bunch of other McDonald's robberies that happened at the time where there was a hole drilled in the ceiling. Originally, Manchester was like, oh, I seen a string of robberies where people had cut a hole in the ceiling and I was inspired to do that. Which, I mean, there's copycat stuff like copycat killers and other copycats for crimes, but it's pretty hard to believe considering that they weren't like huge media at the time. They were just like, oh, these McDonald's are getting robbed all over the place. So they eventually found him in connection with these, and he admitted to them, actually. That was the biggest conviction, was a confession. And I mean, this was not a small amount of robberies. This was like 40 to 60 McDonald's was the estimation. 60, like 60. Dude, that is so many McDonald's. And that's like in the course of, he started before the divorce, which is before 1999 to 2000. So that's literally within the course of like a year and a half, 2 years at most. That's 30 McDonald's a year. That's over 2 a month. This dude just like saw McDonald's and was like, all right, let's go make some money. So, he would get sentenced to only the 2 that he was caught doing, which is surprising. He was sentenced to 45 years, and he would later begin to serve that prison sentence. So he would spend the next 4 years in the Brown Creek Correctional Institution in Polkton, North Carolina. And during this time, I feel like shows a lot of his conniving ability because he wouldn't just spend it idly in prison. He was actually looking for a means of escape. And his idea of finding that was he noticed a lot of trucks that would be coming in and out of the facility. So he started to keep track of these trucks, and he began to plan an idea to sneak onto one of these trucks as they were leaving. And over time, he would make a piece of plywood that he would spray paint black that would go in accordation with this plan. And on June 15th, 2004, Jeffrey Manchester would sneak underneath the undercarriage of one of these trucks and use this piece of plywood to hide himself, essentially, during the night as this truck was escaping. That way, that if they were to check the undercarriage of the truck, all they would see is the black plywood and it would conceal his body. And to my astonishment, he was successful in this attempt. And he would then hitchhike his way to Charlotte, which is roughly 45 miles. I have so many questions. I'd love to know like how this facility was and like how it was laid out at the time. Because I would assume that's not a small piece of plywood. And I would assume that that's not a easy task to do that without anybody noticing, especially on like prison trucks. But he did it. He was on his way. He was a free man heading to Charlotte. However, it seems like he didn't have much of a plan. So like once he got to Charlotte, he found a Toys R Us during that night, and he would essentially be living in there. So it wasn't like a closed Toys R Us. I know that we think Toys R Us nowadays, like, oh, they went bankrupt, like, oh, we don't see them anymore, oh, they're not open. But this was 2004. They were pretty popular back then. He would live there in this thing during the night, and during the day he would like hide in like the back room or a specific little place that he could kind of tuck himself away. And he would survive on obviously the food that was in the Toys R Us. And if you don't know what's in there, it's like, you know, little kids snacks and a lot of baby food because it's a kids store. And and it, he wouldn't let himself sit idly. He'd find a way to exercise. So what he would do, of his own testimony, is that he would take one of like the bikes and he would ride it around the halls of the in the aisles of the Toys R Us as a means of exercise during the night, which is incredible. I imagine that a bike like that is not an adult bike. So he's riding around on a kid's bike through the aisles of a Toys R Us at like midnight. God knows how he could see, but that is a man dedicated to the craft. I so badly wish that there were some type of security cameras or something that could have shown me this footage, because that is incredible. However, these things wouldn't stay so easy, as during December there was the holiday rush, so Toys R Us would get really busy, and it would be very difficult for Manchester to sneak around in any way, shape, or form. However, he would luck out again, as there was a Circuit City right next door, and it was recently abandoned and closed down. So, if you're someone who's a little younger, honestly, I don't know if, I think I've seen them, but I've never been inside one. A Circuit City is essentially a Radio Shack. It's an electronics appliance store. It also did a lot of movie stuff. Again, just think of it like a Radio Shack. They went defunct in like 2009 or something. Not super important, just in case you didn't know what they were. And when they would close down, they wouldn't immediately get rid of everything. They would kind of leave them there for a while, only because it was pretty expensive to do that. And, I mean, at that point, whatever, right? So, at the end of the day, he basically had a free Circuit City to himself. He would set up a camp, like a little bedroom underneath the staircase with a TV, and he would like watch movies there. Like he had like his own like little built-in theater. And I mean, like, he took this to the next level. He painted the walls in that thing. He got posters for it. He had this theater set up, like I said earlier. He had like a little covering over the front, like a little think of it like you're making a pillow fort. And he had like a rag over the front that you could open it like a curtain. Which, I mean, other than being like a kid's dream to try and do that, probably wasn't so glamorous. And during this time, he started making a plan that he would hit it big, that he would rob the Toys R Us. Now, this would be a bigger robbery than he was used to, and he took no detail out of the equation. He went so far as to like put baby monitors up in corners of the Toys R Us and use them like security footage, like little security cameras, which, talk about using the tools given to you. Like, dude, it's so crazy to me to see somebody who has like the problem-solving skills of this to just be like, I'm gonna use it to rob shit. I mean, so at this time, like, technology wasn't super advanced like we see it nowadays. You know, like if you get like a schedule from your work or something, it's normally online. They would do them like paper schedules, right? Like punch out cards and whatnot. So he would also change the employees' schedules around when like they weren't there, like off the clock. So that way it would work best to when he would go and want to rob the place. And you would think at this point he's still in hiding, but he's not. Like, he's actively talking with the community. He had a girlfriend at the time, and he was also committed to a church. But the more important one at this point in time is going to be the girlfriend. The girlfriend's name is Leigh Wainscott, and I feel really bad for her. Manchester would use the alias of John Zorn, and whenever she would ask about whether or not, like, you know, he had like a house or what his occupation was, he would be very secretive and tell her very few details. He said that he was part of like the Secret Service and nobody can know where he lives and he's doing secret missions. And she was okay with that. She had 2 kids at the time, and Manchester would take toys from the Toys R Us that he was living in, and he would give them to the children often as like a way to make them like him more. But then you're also probably thinking, well, if he's part of the community, he's probably not committing a lot of crimes. But you're also wrong, because during this time that he's preparing to rob the Toys R Us, he committed various crimes. He reportedly gotten work done at a dentist, and I'm assuming he didn't like it because he burned the office down in Charlotte. He was also reported to be someone who robbed a pawn shop, assumedly to acquire a firearm for his step up in robberies, which would be the Toys R Us. So he certainly wasn't inactive during this time. But the dentist's office is just mean. Like, they had to have seriously messed up your teeth, dude. I can't really see why you just burn it to the ground. And so, with his newly acquired firearm, on December 26th, 2004, Manchester would rob the Toys R Us that he had lived in for the past 6 months. However, during the robbery, with that many people involved, 2 of the employees slipped away. They got to call the police, and Manchester wasn't able to collect all the funds that he wanted from the registers, and he had to flee early. The police would arrive on scene, and while they were surrounding the area, checking things over, make sure that he didn't have the ability to escape, they found his little home in Circuit City. And they also found the only piece of fingerprint evidence, which which is on a CD of not a CD, a DVD of Catch Me If You Can. Which is just so poetic. It's awesome. That's awesome. The police would do a wide search of Charlotte. They wouldn't find him. However, he wouldn't leave Charlotte, and I would assume it's because of his girlfriend, Wayne Scott. And the police would find Wayne Scott. They would tell him of who he actually was and not his alias. And they would eventually try and get Wayne Scott to call Manchester to come to the house. So on January 5th, 2005, she would call him to come to her house, where he would arrive and be recaptured. This would put an end to his escape at 204 days, or 6 months and 3 weeks. He was on the run. He would go to trial again. He would be found for so many different crimes and sentenced to 40 years in jail. Manchester would go to trial, and amongst all of the crimes that he would be found guilty of, he would end up being sentenced to 40 years in prison. And during his time in prison, he would try and escape again, once in 2009, and another, I believe, in 2013. And during his time in prison, he would try escaping once in 2009 and another in 2013. Both of these would be unsuccessful because, I mean, you really only get one shot to escape prison before they know what you're going to start doing again. In the end, Jeffrey Allen Manchester was a very interesting person. He had so many qualities to him that I think that would be incredibly useful in any other field. Obviously the Army, but here we are. And now, with all of this, I find it just to be kind of a silly, sad story of a guy who just wanted to be good at one thing, and that was robbing McDonald's. I thought it was wacky enough to have its own story, and maybe you learned something about it. I'm not too sure, as long as it's not how to rob a McDonald's, because no, that's bad. Don't do that. So thank you for watching. Again, my name is Mike. I'm working on a few different longer projects in this one, so this is kind of like a little fun pause in between that. I don't want to leave you guys up and dry when it comes to like lack of content or whatnot. So I'm out of here pretty much, and until I see you guys again, be kinder than necessary. Peace.